Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts series on what democracy means in everyday life. Today's episode looks at democracy through the lens of immigration. I'm Marlene O'Brien, the moderator. I'm on the steering committee of the National League's Immigration Interest Group and have served on the local, state, and national boards of the League. The League is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that encourages informed, active participation in civic life. For more than a century, 105 years to be exact, we've worked to empower voters and defend democracy. This discussion is being co-produced by NewTV and recorded on Thursday, March 27, 2025 at its lovely studios here in Newton, Massachusetts. Welcome to today's expert panelists. Donna Gallagher, first, is a nurse practitioner, a PhD and retired assistant professor of family medicine at UMass Medical Graduate Nursing School and at UMass Boston. She is the founding co-director of the UMass Chan Office of Global Health and has served as director of New England AIDS Education and Training Center, funded by HHS. She has provided care for oncology and HIV patients for over 30 years. Next, Sarang Sekavat first joined MIRA, the Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, in 2008, and he has served as political director and since 2023 as chief of staff of MIRA. Born in Brockton to recent immigrants from Iran, Sarang began his immigration work in response to the special registration program adopted after 9/11 by the Bush administration. Sarang studied as an undergrad at Tufts, earned his master's in international relations at BU, and then earned his JD from Brooklyn Law School. Susan Martin, a pleasure to welcome as well via Zoom. Susan is the Donald G. Hertzberg Professor Emerita of International Migration in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. She founded and directed its Institute for the Study of International Migration. Prior to Georgetown, Susan served as executive director of the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform. She's held positions at the World Bank, Refugee Policy Group, Penn, and Brandeis, and is president of the San Juan Islands League of Women Voters. Susan's stellar book, crystal clear language, is called A Nation of Immigrants. It's widely acclaimed go-to text on U.S. immigration history and policy. So welcome again to each of you, and thank you for being with us for this special episode. Susan, how do current federal immigration policies challenge democratic principles enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and what are their implications for marginalized communities at this time?
Thank you so much for having me. It's very clear that from the time of the Declaration of Independence onward, that concerns about immigration were a part of life within what became the United States. But interestingly, one of the reasons given in the Declaration of Independence for separating itself from Britain was the fact that the king, in what was becoming the United Kingdom, decided that they shouldn't be receiving more immigrants, and they slowed down processes of naturalization, since the colonies really needed to have more people coming in from Europe in particular, that was seen by the writers of the Declaration to be a major problem and one of the reasons to separate from the Crown. So when we look now at immigration, I think what we're seeing is, in a way, the canary in the mines. That when immigrants are deprived of due process, when they're unable to feel safe within the country in which they're living, whether they're have legal status or are undocumented. Then what we see is that these issues move on to citizens. We saw that in the Japanese internment camps, that it started off was enemy aliens, term that's come back up again. But over time, it was also citizens who were interred. The U.S. apologized way too late for that policy, but it's a lesson in how we can only really retain a democracy if we protect the most vulnerable within our populations, and often those are the immigrants in those populations. So there's a clear relationship between the words of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and our treatment within the democracy. And we really lose the potential of being a democratic society if we let some of the types of actions that the new administration is taking, and because we'll only see it spreading.
Could you talk about the integration of immigrants?
Sure. Immigrant integration is a really, really important issue. The terminology that's been used to describe this process has changed over the years from assimilation and to integration or inclusion. I actually do like the term inclusion, that what we're doing is trying to make sure that we're providing an environment in which newcomers, people who are coming from other countries, feel so welcomed in the United States and do believe that their rights will be upheld.
Thank you.
It's a two-way street. The immigrants clearly have the obligation to adopt our legal standards, our ways of life, our mode of protest and things of that sort. But we, as citizens who are already in the country, have a responsibility as well to make sure that immigrants have the opportunities to be able to really deal with becoming Americans in one way or another, and understanding the diversity of the American public on that. So that's to me the basics. I think that next level down are things like ensuring the protection of immigrant rights are respected, and that the citizen rights are also respected. That's, again, that two-way street. It's providing economic opportunities for immigrants, be able to work and become a part of our workforce.
Thank you, Susan. I think let's turn to Sarang now to talk about the integration of immigrants and the importance of that to democracy at this time.
I would love to first off just second everything that Susan said. I think very much, very appropriate. I think for us a big part of the issues, we often talk about social, political, and economic integration. The social is simply just being accepted as part of the communities that you live in. We were talking about neighbors, co-workers, your kids' classmates in school, things like that. Economic, of course, we're just talking about having the same opportunities everyone else has to work, to grow, economic development, as simply put. It's the political, I think, where I think we do lack a little. And when you're talking about the political, it's easy to talk about voting, getting folks registered to vote, getting them out to the polls. But I think one piece that we're missing a lot of times when we talk about inclusion and integration is making sure that people understand that, regardless of their actual immigration status, they're still constituents of legislators. And those legislators are still representing everyone.
So how do you encourage them to become more engaged?
So
especially at a time when they're worried about First Amendment issues, raising their voice sounds very appealing, but there can be retaliation, retribution.
Absolutely, and we just last week had our Immigrants Day in the State House, our annual lobby day, where we brought a few hundred folks to lobby with our legislators across the state. Part of it is making sure that, training them beforehand to say, this is how you talk to legislators. Here, this is how you tell your story to legislators, things like that. Making sure that it's also not just a one-day thing, that people understand that you can do this anytime you want. It's the people's house in the State House. But another thing, you hit on a really important point, which was there was a lot of fear going into that lobby day. What happens if ICE shows up in the State House? And so I think a lot of it is having the support of other community members. Just that alone helps people feel safer, being in a group rather than being out there on their own.
Thank you. Well, on the point of what happens when ICE arrives on the scene, whether it's in a hospital or a clinic or a school, I think, Donna, you may have some helpful reflections and advice in this regard, given your experience.
Well, we did sort of beforehand speak a little bit about my ongoing PTSD from having witnessed an ICE event about 15, 16 years ago, in the middle of caring for a patient, having ICE come in and literally sit the patient up and handcuff them and carry them out of the emergency room I happened to be in. That memory has always sort of stayed with me. Never did I think it would have to come to the forefront again, but as we started to see the changes that were happening since the election, it brought the people that I work with and the administration at the hospital to have a discussion about, well, what is it that we are supposed to do? We were clearly unprepared when this happened the first time that I witnessed it. And we really didn't have a very good handle on, can we get in the way? Can we keep the patient from being taken from our clinic? What are our rights? And then learning more about what their rights are. But what do we do? I mean, what do we do if they come with guns blazing? Do we get in the middle of this? Do we step aside? And so it was actually a good exercise where we all had to discuss what the legal issues were, what the legal rights were for both the people who worked there and the patients, and that then became a whole discussion where we realized that many of our colleagues, many of the people that worked with us, were part of mixed families where someone in their family was not documented, and so they were coming to work every day concerned that they might go home and find someone from their family missing.
May I ask, before you go on to...
Sure.
Could we go on to Know Your Rights campaigns that are going on now, and very, informative material being circulated by certain immigrant groups to help people understand their Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, due process, self-incrimination, search and seizure, provisions of the Constitution, what they're entitled to and what not. I'd like to ask you about your experience in facilities. Do you have practical advice for the viewers today on what to do? Practical advice when it comes to hospitals as well as schools.
Right.
ICE has arrived at schools in Massachusetts and asked to interview a student. What would your advice be?
Well,
I'd be interested also in Susan and Sarang's input.
I think that as you talked about knowing the rights, it's not usually in the health professional's wheelhouse to have a working knowledge of all of the rights that are available. I think because we don't stop to think that anyone is going to infringe upon them. We don't know the legal status of our patients immediately. We often find that out through conversation or knowing someone for a long period of time. So that's not really sort of front of mind when you're taking care of someone. So this sort of brings it to an everyday thought process. And what we had recommended is that everybody understand, and we did get some materials so that they understand what the rights are, because honestly, I couldn't have recited what the rights were for myself or for my patients. And you know, I have several patients who they themselves are legal, but the people who are caring for them are not. They brought people from their home countries, and if they get taken off, then this patient really has a good chance of not having care and potentially dying. So we have made it our own, and we're just one small group, but we have made it our business to know more about whose rights are whose. And because I'm involved in other boards that involve children, I wanted to know if the same issue was the problem at our school-age children programs. Do the people that work there know what to do if the ICE agents show up at the door? And no, they didn't either. So I think this is a broad conversation that the general public probably isn't aware of. Who's right? Who's wrong? Is it okay for ICE agents to stop you on the street or come into your kid's classroom? Do we have a plan for what do we do with the other patients, the staff, and the other children in a classroom when this happens and they're witness? Because I know what happened to me witnessing it, so I can only imagine what it would do to a classroom full of children to witness somebody be dragged out. So but you probably know more about that than I do.
Yeah, just a couple of things to add, and I think you had a really good point, Donna, about, you know, you can't expect all of the staff at a location to be well versed in rights and to be able to speak to law enforcement should they come in. So I think one thing we've seen in a lot of facilities, a lot of both schools, hospitals, and other kind of settings is that they've developed policies where there's one point person, so that if you have ICE coming in, you know what, it's not my job to talk to them. There's someone else who's trained and knows what they're doing to come talk to them, and start from there. Another thing that we're seeing very useful is that, you know, you still need a warrant to go into certain places. Right. If I, as just a person off the street, can't just walk into a school, neither can ICE. They are going to need a warrant. But one thing you find is that you have a lot of places, hospitals, especially medical facilities, you're going to have some areas are public, some areas are private. And so it's always a good idea to have a very clear map marking out what areas are public, what areas are private, what areas can ICE just walk around in, and where do they need a warrant.
What do you think of this, Susan, in terms of ICE's greater presence among us these days?
Yeah, well, there definitely is a major presence, and part of the issue is that the ICE enforcement agents are really under pressure to round up as many people as possible, to apprehend them and put them onto a deportation process. And the best way for them to get those numbers is to actually go to the places where they know there are whether children or adults who are undocumented. And they often know that they're there because they're known to the government. They're often trying to get their status legalized on that. But the point that was made about the warrants is really, really important because many of the times that ICE goes into a facility, it has a request for a detainer that almost looks like it's a warrant or a subpoena. But if it doesn't come from a judge that's outside of the immigration system, it really doesn't have the power that a warrant would have. And so it's important and I agree that having a single point of contact makes a whole lot of sense, but it's important for them to understand that not every document that ICE provides is one that you have to act on. And you can refuse admission, and you can refuse entry of the person if they don't have the proper documentation.
This is fascinating. I was also curious about the experience of those who fear the agency from, what's their experience now in terms of reluctance to seek health care? What kind of impact will that have, whether seeking health care for themselves or their families or someone else in their community, an older neighbor they may know? What kind of impact would that have, not only on that immigrant community where they live, but also on public health? Could you comment on that,
Well,
please?
I mean, we've already seen the impact on directly on some of our patients who were always accompanied by their closest provider, who it turns out is undocumented, so is not coming out of the house anymore. You know, I would say that there's widespread fear. I mean, the patients are afraid that even if somebody protects them while they're in the clinic, that if they step out the door of the hospital, that they're going to be, one of my patients said, they're going to wait for me and grab me when I walk out the door. And I can't reassure them that that's not going to happen, and I don't think we have any jurisdiction outside on the street. So it certainly impacts, and we are seeing, just like the schools are seeing, people not coming to their appointments, kids not going to school, you know, people not going to work. I think that there has been a pretty successful campaign of fear that has changed the whole environment. And it's people that were religious about coming every single time they had an appointment, and then all of a sudden they call and say, I'm not feeling well, or I can't, but they do that 3 or 4 times in a row. And my patients are cancer or HIV, so it isn't really optional for them to come. It means that they are jeopardizing their health in a major way. It's not like they have a sore throat and they don't get to have it taken, although that is happening as well. But I mean, this is high stakes treatment, and they're still making the decision that they don't want to be out and visible to the public. So that's pretty chilling from our perspective.
And another aspect of this presence here in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the country, certainly many communities are worrying about it. Let's talk about transparency, and perhaps we'll start with Sarang and then move on. Transparency, I think we all would agree that transparency is a hallmark of democracy. And journalists are now reporting new difficulties in accessing data on the operations of ICE and on detention, on CBP, on border encounters, and on migrant demographics, and on USCIS, on green cards, asylum, naturalization, and refugee admissions. How does access to full, reliable data on the activities and operations of these agencies affect everyday life in our democracy?
I mean, simply put, without good data, you can't make good policy. There's nothing to build, this is very much a post-policy administration. They're about politics, they're about PR, they're not about policy, they're not about actually doing what's good for the country, they're about doing what looks good and what resonates with their base. And this is part of the reason why they're bearing all these statistics. And it's not just immigration. I think you can look at healthcare sector. I think you can look at environmental. Yes. I think you can look at any number of things. The whole point is to hide the truth so that they can do whatever they want without regards to is it actually good for the country or not.
Mm-hmm. Susan, are you hearing this as well? About journalists struggling with challenges to gain the data that they used to be provided so easily?
Yeah, oh, definitely. It's not just from journalists, but also from people who do research on immigration, whether it's on a policy level or on practice, they're not getting access. There's still some coming out because the Freedom of Information Act that does require certain data to be available. But that's one of the reasons that the use of the Enemy Aliens Act is so disturbing, because under that, the administration feels that they don't have to explain anything that they're doing, that they have a crisis on their mind, we're under attack in their viewpoint. And as a result of that, it's really not clear yet as cases go through the law, through the judicial system, whether they're going to get away with it. And part of the problem is that there's so little transparency in what they're doing that it's hard to know to what extent they are in violation. It appears, of course, that they are, but because they probably wouldn't be hiding all of this information. But it's really a major threat to democracy if we can't hold our leaders accountable for actions that they're taking.
Thank you. Anything to add?
I think Susan said it very well.
I agree. Thank you very much, Susan.
I was just thinking, sort of having an afterthought about the impact of not having data, and of course, the recent developments where the shutting down of the NIH and the websites, the CDC websites, and coupled with the environment of fear has led to really a public health crisis, in that we rely heavily on that data to find populations that may not have been vaccinated or may not have, and children coming to school and knowing vaccination status. So, we're looking at larger and larger populations of people who are afraid to get services, but are also afraid to get preventive care, vaccines, just generalized screening, and things like what we're seeing in Texas with large numbers of cases of measles and underreported. People are hiding in their houses. The undocumented who have measles are hiding, and it's not being reported. So we really are in sort of a situation with research that leaves us, everybody's sort of shrugging their shoulders and guesstimating what the extent of all of these issues are. But a year of people hiding from their health care will probably result in another year of pretty much disastrous needs for people who have been uncared for, or particularly prenatal care and other things like that. We're sort of operating in the dark at this point, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. So and having people sort of taken away that are in any kind of treatment. There was a whole discussion about one of the young men that got carried off to El Salvador, who was quite ill and is quite ill and not getting any care while he's in the prison. So we're going to see more of that. And as a person who's been in healthcare for most of my life, it really is a chilling concept that people are just going to be pulled out and allowed to die or not be cared for at all. Very un-American from my perspective. So,
well, that's fascinating and very disturbing, and it's really should be disturbing for us all when we start speaking about public health and the risks of measles outbreaks, not to mention other kinds of outbreaks. You've raised a key point. I'd like to turn to taking action at this point. I think our viewers would be very interested. What can I do? The average person who may not have immigration expertise but wants to do something. So in terms of proposed state legislation, the League itself, the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts that is in coalition with MIRA, thanks to you and your wonderful colleagues, supporting the Safe Communities Act, the Dignity Not Deportation Act, the Immigrant Legal Defense Act, as well as acts surrounding protections for agricultural workers at this time. There's also a language access bill. I think our viewers would be curious what kinds of things is MIRA focusing on right now in terms of priorities, aside from pushing legislation as part of coalition. What are your top concerns of all the many issues we're facing?
It depends who you ask on our staff. We all
We're
have
asking
different
you.
concerns. We've talked a little bit about the Know Your Rights work, and that seems to be the most important thing right now, and frankly, one of the most useful. We know it's working because we've seen the administration complain. We've seen them threaten congresswomen with prosecution
Right.
for telling people what their civil rights are. The Know Your Rights really has been, it's been a bit of a game changer, as much as we can have a game changer right now. And also just making sure, just like any community, rumors can spread pretty quickly, whether it's about ICE enforcement actions or, simply just what the law says, anything like that, what policy changes there are. So a big part of the work that I personally have been doing has just been trying to keep track of everything that's happening and make sure that that information's getting to our membership in a clear and concise manner. And just being available too whenever anyone does have questions about what's actually happening, so that we can make sure that people have the most accurate and up-to-date information.
Are people expressing much concern about the Alien Enemies Act?
There's some concern about that, but I think people are just generally more concerned about having ICE out on the street, all the time. They have expanded something called expedited removal, which allows them to deport people without due process. People who've been here up to 2 years now can be deported without due process. And this has been a huge fear among a lot of the community, especially since a lot of the community, a lot of these folks who've been allowed into the country late in the Biden administration are going to be subject to this when they have status taken away by this administration.
Susan, would you like to comment?
Yeah, definitely. To me, one of the main things to keep in mind is that the only way right now we have of stopping any of this is through the courts. It's not likely that Congress will be taking any steps to change the Trump policies, but the courts can very well do it. And, the democracy really depends on whether we have the separation of powers and we have the judicial process for keeping government officials doing what they're supposed to be doing and not other things on that. So what I would recommend to people who want to do something is to support the organizations from the national to the local area that are suing the government over various executive orders or administrative actions that are really harmful. These organizations need the financial support in order for them to keep doing the great work that we've just been hearing about. But also, the other part of that is also if you're in a state that is a welcoming state, a sanctuary state, there are lots of different terms to refer to it, is to make sure you keep the pressure up on your legislators and the governors to keep their word and continue to protect the rights of the residents of their state, regardless of the legal status of those residents, because at least we can save some people from the worst things happening in these states, and maybe be guidance to other states when they start to hear from constituents saying, why has my neighbor been picked up? She's never committed a crime. which I'm sure we'll be hearing of more and more as more comes out.
Susan, I'm interested, you referred to separation of powers, and Professor Jody Friedman of Harvard Law School recently suggested the administration is, quote, currently unchecked by Congress, risking an unbalancing of the traditional separation of powers. How have immigrants been caught in this crossfire, would you say? We're talking, for the viewers that I believe would be familiar with this, but the executive, judicial, and legislative branches, the Congress at this point is being, seems to be standing down, possibly abdicating its responsibilities, some say, in terms of incursions on its authority by the executive branch. And the judicial branch is having to assert itself and say orders need to be followed. There's a constitutional crisis we're experiencing. Many of us don't think it's just on the horizon, it's here now. But do you have any comments on Jody's characterization of where we are at this time? And I'd be interested in hearing from the rest of you as well.
Yeah, I would say I agree with her very much with the position that we need to be worried about the fact that the separation of powers seem to be eroding. Congress actually does have the plenary power to determine what our immigration policies are and how they're going to be put into force. It's not the executive branch. The executive branch has a much more limited role constitutionally when it comes to immigration. It's to follow the rules that the Congress sets up. But our Congress has not been able to make any changes in immigration policy over now a quite long period of time. I think the last major piece of legislation on legal immigration was 1990, and a lot of has changed since then. So we really do need to push our members of Congress to not give up their own authorities and the ones that they for a long time have fought to keep, just because there's a president who insists that they let him take over. And we have to also encourage the judicial branches to not defer in any way to the executive branch when the executive branch is taking illegal action or going contrary to the Constitution, because otherwise we're going to be ending our democracy, because democracy is so much based on the separation of powers.
Thank you, Susan.
I think that I forget who I heard say this, but I wholeheartedly agree that this is, democracy is us. It's not the Congress. It's not it's not any branch. It is us. We are the reason the Congress exists. And so, if there's never been a time to step up, everybody in every community needs to play a role now. Not wait and see what happens. Not figure out that he'll do it, or I'll do it, or you'll do it. It's everybody's responsibility to be stepping up. There's lots of opportunities. There's now myriad protests, opportunities to speak out, town halls. I mean, I think that we've all been a little sleepy, and it's been I'm a product of the Vietnam War, so I remember making a difference because we all, in large masses, spoke up. If there's never been a time to do that, I think it's now. We have to learn the information that you have available about rights. We have to get beyond our fear that they're going to drag me off from the protest and get out there and speak, call our legislators, because it's not up to them, it's up to us. And since they have been lying down, I know you said they weren't standing up, but they're lying down, and we need to either get them up off the ground or push them up off the ground, but I don't think they're going to move on their own, particularly one of the parties. They need a lot of, they need what's happening, people fighting back and speaking up And, you know, I have been trying to educate my young grandchildren, my younger grandchildren who are adult people, about why this needs to happen, because there isn't the urgency that I think we need to have. And that's just from an old protest person. But I feel like, you know, there are days where I say, well, don't just ask me about this, get out there and stand next to me at the protest. And I feel like that's the urgency that needs to happen. We can't all just read about it in the newspaper. But that's just my own personal spot.
Sarang?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with everything you just said, Donna. And I think, you know, I look at it this way. Congress should be holding the president accountable.
Exactly.
They're not. So it's up to us to hold Congress accountable. And there's a couple of places where I'm really concerned, in addition to the things that Susan was saying about separation of powers. One is the recent continuing resolution that passed. Now, normally these continuing resolutions have some guardrails around this money must be spent in this way, and they took that out of it this time. So money that, you know, maybe should be going, for example, to assist refugee resettlement. Well, there's nothing stopping them from using that money instead to, you know, keep people in prison for civil violations, which is what we're really talking about when we talk about immigration detention. The other thing that I'm really concerned about, and I also agree with, you know, Susan talked about we're really relying heavily on the courts right now. But I am not confident that this administration is going to honor court decisions. They've already shown a bit of that, both in, you know, the flights to El Salvador, Venezuelans to El Salvador, but also what we saw here just recently at Tufts a couple of days ago, where they detained a graduate student there and shipped her to Louisiana in violation of a court order. So I think I do worry that at some point it's only going to be about the people and not about the government.
I would agree with all that you've said. I'd say other actions that the League encourages people to take is to vote, including in to your local and state elections, which can be critical, and also to show up, to be very careful about, you know, limiting your focus to something that you really care about, following it, becoming informed, and then taking action. This means contacting your legislators. Also, certainly letters to the editor, it helps. Social media, not just sort of reacting to a post you vehemently disagree with, but actually separately posting, far more effective, starting a new thread, and doing everything you can, standing up. You advocate for protests and demonstrations on the Boston Common. We've seen a fair number of them recently. All these things can be very helpful. And most importantly, vote, of course. Susan, would you like to add anything to the what you can do litany?
Well, let me pick up where you were just, what you were just saying is that as a league, all of our leagues are interested in making sure that newcomers can naturalize when they become eligible for it. And we do a lot of voter registration throughout the state, my case, state of Washington, but I'm sure same thing happening in Massachusetts. But that's not enough. We really have to think about civic engagement in a much broader way as a league and also as a country, where it's not enough to just be able to vote if you don't understand the voting system, or you are faced with pages of resolutions and things of that sort that are in legalese. I have trouble understanding them. You can imagine what it's like for an immigrant who is trying to, is fluent enough in English to become naturalized citizen, but may not understand the language that's used in our ballots. And so I think we really have to dig down much more deeply in terms of what do we need to do to make sure that, immigrants are comfortable going to a PTA meeting, for this school, because they have the resources in place. That's really where civic engagement has to be thought about. It's not just becoming a citizen and voting, it's understanding what all of this means.
Well, thank you. You put it this way one time, Susan, and I really appreciated it, that it seems we can improve democracy by working on aspects of immigration policy that contribute to a positive future. A good future is one in which people feel safe again and makes migrants believe, and this is my favorite part, I must admit, that democracy is the solution to the very problems that force them to leave their countries in the first place. We want to be that welcoming democracy and engage our citizens. I'd like you to offer some closing comments. Each of you take a minute or two on what you think you want viewers to consider as they think about our discussion today.
Well, I mean, I think I'm pretty transparent. I really feel like it's time to get up and move, and talk to the businesses in your town, talk to anybody that you can talk to about this being a problem and something that we all need to participate in. And no more going to parties and keeping your mouth shut because it's not popular. Talk about how important it is to have immigrants. I think we've kind of lost sight of the fact that this country works because it has immigrants, and the value of this country is the richness of all of the different backgrounds and cultures that we have here. And so if we want to preserve that and preserve democracy, you got to put some effort into it. So roll up your sleeves is my advice.
Mm-hmm. Sarang.
Yeah. You actually said something that really resonated with me about, start the news thread. Don't just be responding to what other people say. And I feel like that's been so much of the problem with the immigrants' rights movement in general, is we're always kind of responding.
Reacting.
It's a reactive, it's not a proactive messaging that we do. And I think the more people can do that, the more we can start the conversation and not just respond to the conversation. Mm-hmm. The more we can set the narrative. I think that's a much stronger way to change hearts and minds. I also think, the outreach to legislators is really vital, because it's sort of along the same lines. The legislators tend to hear from people who hate immigration. Mm-hmm. They don't hear from the people who support immigration, mm-hmm. because, majorities in polls have always supported immigration, but it's such a low priority for people. Mm-hmm. It's not what's going to make you call your legislator. But the people who hate immigration, the people who are the xenophobes, it is a high priority for them. And so they're the ones who, not only are the legislators hearing from, but they're hearing from very loudly. And we can no longer be the silent majority in that.
Very good. Susan?
One of the issues we haven't talked about yet, and I'll kind of end my statement with that, is the assault on birthright citizenship. Mm-hmm. Because although it's a complex issue, it's really also really fundamental to our democracy. That one of the reasons that the U.S. does so well in integrating immigrants is that being an immigrant is one generation. The children are always going to be U.S. citizens. But this administration is trying to overturn that. And it's not just for people who are here undocumented and having children, but also temporary workers who come, who may be in this country for the rest of their lives, but they're in a in a status that says temporary on it instead of permanent. And so I think we really do have to fight as a league and as citizens of our country to retain birthright citizenship. It's part of the 14th Amendment, which also gave citizenship to slaves. And we shouldn't tinker with that particular part of our legacy. So that's an area I think which really needs a lot more attention, because we just don't know what the courts will do with that. We know what the lower courts are doing, but not the Supreme Court.
That's a very good point, because it seems obvious to so many of us. It's enshrined in the Constitution, but as with other rights that have seemed obvious, we have seen the approach of persistently working to erode small pieces with a view towards larger goals. So I think it's excellent that you bring up that, and that you brought up temporary protective status. As you may know, Susan was the author or co-author of the TPS legislation that has led to more than 1 million immigrants at this time being here under protective status. We obviously have some issues moving forward, but Massachusetts is home to a large Haitian community that benefits from TPS, a large DR community, and others. And we're very fortunate to have them here, because for TPS you have you have to show a sponsor, or you need a work visa, you get a work permit. So it all is very positive for the country. And I know, Susan, that you were disappointed with TPS that the legislation unfortunately didn't include, when it finally passed, the pathway to citizenship. But that's something that may be in the future.
Can I just add one thing, though? It's not just a TPS. What it does is it also has, if you're here on a temporary work permit, a lot of the high-tech people in Massachusetts, Washington State, California, et cetera, are here on temporary work visas. Many of them can have the ability to apply to become a permanent resident, but it could take sometimes decades before they actually are able to do so. And so we are also at risk of losing some of the high-skilled immigrants who come into the country because their children will no longer have a route to legal permanent residence. So it's across a lot more than just one or two statuses. It's quite a lot of statuses.
Susan, birthright citizenship, just for a second, moving back to that, isn't the U.S. quite unique in this regard, having first generation? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
No, it's actually not unique at all. And it goes back in our country it goes back in our country to the colonial period when the Virginia colony came up with the conclusion that if somebody is an immigrant coming from not Britain but some other country, they would be granted birthright citizenship. So we have a long history, but almost every country in the Western Hemisphere has some form of birthright citizenship. And countries like Germany and Europe, a number of years ago, Germany decided that some of the Turkish workers who had come in were now in the 4th generation without citizenship because they didn't have birthright citizenship. So they changed their policy and they provided a way that somebody could get birthright citizenship. So it's much broader.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was thinking of a few countries, Southeast Asia, where it isn't, and extrapolating from there. Well, let's conclude now. On behalf of the League of Women Voters and NewTV, thank you very much to our expert panelists, and thank you to you viewers for tuning in for what democracy means in everyday life. Here I've given you a few league tips and you've heard many more from these eminent scholars and practitioners on what you yourself can do, I'd like to thank NewTV and our state league and local leagues for sponsoring this program. Any use or reuse of the program requires approval of both NewTV and the league and must be shown in its entirety without any editing after the program initially airs on NewTV. The opinions and the statements of the presenters are their own and do not in any way represent those of the League of Women Voters of NewTV or NewTV. Membership in the league is open to everyone. To join or support us, please visit lwv.org. We would love to have you. NewTV itself is Newton's award-winning state-of-the-art media center specializing in television production and training and building community partnerships. It is Newton's primary source of locally relevant programming, and membership in NewTV is open to all Newton residents. To join or support it, visit newtv.org. I'm Marlene O'Brien, and for the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, remember, please, democracy is not a spectator sport. Thank you.